That is some really calming music, isn't it, Ben?
I feel very relaxed, Chavez. I feel like we should enter into a moment of introspection and quiet reflection now. Not an exciting live stream on the last live stream of Hacktoberfest. How are
Yes.
you?
I mean, I'm doing really great. How about yourself? How was your
I
holidays? I know
am
you had a
doing really well myself too. It is a Tuesday evening, and I couldn't imagine a better person to spend my Tuesday evening with than with you, Chavez, on live stream and all of our Couchbase friends. Hello,
no,
everyone,
absolutely.
all of our Couchbase fans and friends.
Yes, absolutely. And I think like the response so far has been really great because, of course, one thing that one should always remain consistent with content creation. And I think like it's not about just being consistent, but it's also continuously delivering great content. And I think like with this entire series that we started in September and now with October, we covered so many different things around Hacktoberfest, and it is so great that we proactively took part in Hacktoberfest. And given that we are just like 2 days now away from the end of the month of October, would love to know how has it been for you? Uh, what what
It's
were
it's
your
been
learnings
very
perhaps
it's been
from
very
the month?
exciting, really
Yeah.
exciting, and I agree. In fact, Oktoberfest and October as a month of Oktoberfest is, I have to say, one of my most favorite times of the year, because I love when so much of our community comes to celebrate open source and to celebrate the ways in which open source powers everything, powers the whole community. And I think we should not just use October as a time to celebrate open source, but really use October as the catalyst, as the launch pad to say, you know what, maybe I'm going to get involved in open source in November and in December and maybe even in January. And I'm going to keep it going throughout the entire year, because really open source doesn't happen without all of us. It doesn't happen without the community getting involved, and I think that is so absolutely just integral. So I'm always excited about the idea that we can, both from me speaking to myself and then others listening, but also to all of us who are here as well, that we can use this time as we're wrapping up near the end to think, hey, what are other ways that I can get involved? What are other things I can do to really inspire my commitment and dedication to this? It's really exciting.
No, for sure. I think, as you very rightly mentioned, that October as a month and Hacktoberfest as this entire program, which kicked off a few years back. And I still remember back in 2017, 16, it was such a massive craze to be able to get that Hacktoberfest t shirt. I still probably have kept all the way from 2017 through 2020, after which they always started to give us the option that, okay, do you want a t-shirt or do you want to plant a tree? And I started to opt for planting the tree because I already had like 3 4 t-shirts. So anyways, my parents would not have allowed me, but it's the idea behind that. It's not just the month of October where you can make open source contributions, but you can make contributions throughout the entire year. So it's a message, an important message for both the people or the folks who are actually contributing, but also for the maintainers, that they should have that same level of enthusiasm when they are addressing any sort of questions or uh, queries that are being raised on issues, and they ensure that they are doing their part of having well documented projects and having the appropriate good open source ethics that one should maintain when they are maintaining a project. So I think it goes both ways. And of course, Hacktoberfest is not just the only way, right? You can contribute, especially if you're a young student or someone who is new to their career. There are so many different open source programs like Google Summer of Code, the Linux Foundation Mentorship Program, which are housing some of the world's biggest open source projects. And like being able to contribute to some of these projects gives you direct software industry experience. And I think like I have at least interacted with quite a lot of folks who are software engineers in our in Couchbase, and who, of course, like you still need to have the basic computer science fundamentals cleared, but they always get an edge when they have open source contributions. So I think like that goes on that goes a long way. So especially if someone has made their first ever contribution in this Hacktoberfest, the journey is just to continue and try to upskill yourself and challenge yourself continuously and try to make bigger and more impactful contributions.
Absolutely. I completely agree. And I think also you touched upon something which is really important, which is that contributing to open source, being part of this community is not just about altruism. And it is about altruism, but it's not just about altruism. It's not just about giving back. You also get from doing it. You get by giving. And what you get is professional development. What you get is professional networking. What you get is community building, which can benefit you in your career. And I would say it doesn't even matter what stage of career you're at, whether you're just starting out as a junior developer, or you're going through in your mid-career, or you're already a senior architect, or a principal level or distinguished level engineer. Contributing to open source, being part of open source projects at whatever pace and space feels comfortable to you at your given point in your career will only come to enhance your career, will only come to benefit you. It's hard to argue, it's hard to see the case where contributing to open source is detrimental to your career. Perhaps if you only do open source work and you don't do your work, it could be detrimental to your career. But if you're able to balance it and offer some open source work, and some of us live in a space where our work is open source, but that's a privilege most people don't have. But if you don't work in open source and you find the ability to contribute to it throughout the year, not just October, you're probably going to find that it's not only helping the open source community and the software community writ large, but you're also helping yourself too. So that's a point. But before we get any further, I just want to make sure that we call it like we do every week. For all of you joining us live on Twitch / YouTube / Twitter / X / LinkedIn, or wherever you're coming in from, and you want to contribute to this conversation either now or throughout the rest of our time together, please do so. We want to hear your comments. We want to talk to you. Drop in a comment. We are not scary, even though we're getting close to Halloween. We're friendly people. We want to be part of the conversation with you. So drop in a note, say hi, and we'd love to have you as part of this conversation. The last bit I'll mention before we jump into some looking at some projects in a few minutes or in a minute or two is not only is it a great idea to contribute your time and your investment of your efforts into open source, whether that's code contributions, documentation, etc. But if you have the ability, if you have the wherewithal, and only if you have that ability and only if you have that wherewithal, am I going to say this, it's also something very profoundly beautiful to give back also financially to open source. It's hard to overstate how important it is to support the software supply chain and how much of what we do, all of us who are participating in this Couchbase live stream right now, if you're working on something, whether it's a personal project, a work project, something in between, you are probably touching upon open source that is being maintained and being committed to and being crafted with love and care by volunteers in the community. People who are passionate about it, people who care about it, people who are invested in it, and open source organizations, foundations that help groom and cultivate that, whether it's the Python Software Foundation or Ruby Central or any other of the myriad of organizations out there that help to foster the continuation of our language communities and the tools and supply chain. That is absolutely integral. So we haven't talked a lot about this for the past few weeks together, Shivay, but yeah. I don't want to go throughout the entire month of Hacktoberfest without mentioning that if you have the ability to, maybe you're a Python developer, maybe you're a JavaScript developer, maybe you're a Ruby developer, maybe you're a Rust developer, there is probably, and by probably almost certainly, a nonprofit foundation somewhere as part of that work that's helping to cultivate and support and maintain the key infrastructure of that language community. Don't neglect them either. They want your support. They need your support. They love your support. And it's a great way to be able to say, hey, I'm really invested in this. Just want to give that shout out.
Yeah. And I think given the fact that so many of these foundations help um, some of the most impactful libraries and projects that are existing today in our open source world. And if it weren't for if it was not for these foundations, then I don't think so it would have been very easy to sustain these open source projects. So I feel it goes a long way to be able to make some sort of a contribution, and it does not have to be like monetary contribution at all times. You can still be contributing through making individual contributions to projects that are being supported, or just like speak about these projects so that other people can perhaps make sponsorships. So I think like it goes a long way to support these foundations for sure.
Completely agree with you. And speaking just from a personal perspective, as a member of the board of Ruby Central, which is the nonprofit that oversees two very critical aspects of the Ruby infrastructure, namely Ruby Gems, which is the repository for all of the packages in Ruby, and Bundler, which is our dependency manager, you wouldn't have a Ruby software supply chain. You wouldn't have Ruby projects without these two critical pieces of infrastructure, in addition
For
to the
sure.
conferences like RubyConf and all the other fun things, and supporting
Yeah.
regional developments and all that fun stuff. So being part of a community in a way in which you're giving back either through committee work or giving back through your fiscal support is so integral, and is also a part of being part of Hacktoberfest. Just want to throw
Yeah.
that out there. Okay, we got an adventure today. So, Shive, you and I kind of talked a little bit this morning about, hey, what should we do today in the stream on our like final session of Hacktoberfest stream before we get into a whole nother subject coming up, which we'll maybe talk about later or maybe not, but that could be a surprise for another time. But
Yeah.
so we said, why don't we look at a couple examples of how we are trying to teach and use open source projects to help people be better in their work and to learn more and to grow more and develop more. And I offered a couple examples, and I'm happy to walk through those examples with us together. And
Yes.
and if you have any examples you want to bring up as well, love to see those examples. But let me just share my screen. Let's see here. Present. Share screen. Okay, I'm going to share the entire screen, but I learned the trick on how to minimize it because it's in a very large screen.
Minimize.
Okay, so you should see a very large screen, and it's a very
That is
overwhelming
very
screen.
large.
Yes, that is very large,
That's a
but let's see if
40,
I can
47-inch screen, right?
50 something, I think,
Oh,
actually.
wow. Even bigger.
But that should, let's see here. I have a lot of things on my desktop. That's really kind of obnoxious. Okay. I take too many screenshots. Let's see, actually, let me try sharing it. That works, I guess. No, you can't really
Yeah.
see. What if I zoom in? That doesn't help,
Yeah, I
does
think
it?
zoom in will help for sure.
Okay, let's zoom in. Let's zoom in. Okay.
Yeah,
So what I
that's perfect.
want to show, that's better, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Let me just come here first. There's a couple things I want to walk through with our time together. So open source is great for dependency management. It's great for projects. It's great for showcasing example applications. It's great for so many things. It's also really great modality and venue of how to learn a new thing, right? It provides us an opportunity to learn in public and learn open and learn in the open. So a topic that is really become kind of front and center for a lot of us nowadays. And Shive, you've developed along with our colleagues an amazing end-to-end vector search workshop that you're unveiling across the globe.
Yeah.
Honestly, Shive's on tour across the globe. Vector search is really just one of those topics, which is
Mhm.
really becoming front and for a lot of people, and realizing like, wait, how do I actually, what is this? How do I build with it? What do I do with it? How do I use it? So if you don't know what vector search is, in the very like on one foot, a brief synopsis what vector search is, it's the ability to find similarity search across data by converting the data into numerical representations called a vector embedding. And those numerical representations can capture a lot of different aspects of the data, things like semantic relationships between data, et cetera, conceptual relationships, et cetera, but depending on what models you use to convert the data into these numerical representations. And that becomes a very powerful tool for a whole lot of stuff. Like maybe it's a product search on a product website. Maybe it's fraud detection on a credit card fraud detection algorithm. Maybe it's understanding the quality of comments on a blog post. Maybe it's content recommendations on a streaming service. The list is not endless, but it's vast of the use cases and utility of that kind of type of search using vectors as opposed to a more keyword type of search. So vector search has become more possible nowadays, given the increasing prevalence of generative AI models and compute resources and all those great things, and people want to incorporate them and build with them, right? Couchbase itself also offers a lot of utility for how you can build vector search. Couchbase as a NoSQL database, as a database that can store semi-structured, unstructured, and fully structured data, can specifically store your vector embeddings, which is unstructured data. And it also offers the ability to create a vector search index, which allows you to do that kind of thing, that similarity search using Couchbase. So instead of building out the algorithms yourself by hand, maybe you want to use, and we're not going to get into these examples right now because they're very complex, but let's say you want to build a similarity search based on dot product, which is one of the similarity metrics. You can Google dot product later. You want to build on dot product. And instead of building out the dot product similarity search algorithm by hand in your code, you could use in a few clicks, essentially, or a few command lines from the Couchbase CLI, build out a vector search index using dot product, enable it into your application, and do that similarity search without having to handcraft a whole bunch of code that you actually don't need. So that's really, really exciting. If it doesn't sound exciting in my voice, I hope I'm conveying all the excitement, because it is actually
absolutely.
really, really exciting.
Yeah, and the explanation that you provided is just mind-blowing. I mean, such a crystal explanation of why is there a need for vector search in the first place. And I think like one thing that you mentioned is that today, if a database does not actually have vector vector search support, I think they're probably just way too behind.
I totally agree.
Yeah, absolutely.
I totally agree with you. Like, if they don't have that capability, well, then we're probably dealing with something troubling there. And I mean, let's call a spade, as they say in the States.
Yeah.
It probably doing something troubling, but at the same time, the utility of it is so incredible and so helpful that it's hard to even state the case of how. Like, you can't state it strongly enough. Anytime you've basically searching for, you're watching some streaming service and you just watched a couple shows about, I don't know, some British baking show, and suddenly you're getting content recommendations that feel very eerily, creepily familiar to you. Like, how does it know I may also want to watch, this Australian barbecue cook-off? Well, maybe because you were watching a British baking show. But think about that. That sounds, let's just take a minute on this, right, Shive? That sounds really simple conceptually to our brains. Like, oh, I like British baking shows. I may also like Australian barbecue shows, like cooking on the Barbie, as an Australian may say, or something like that, or grilling on the Barbie. Like, that sounds intuitive when we think through it, but training a machine to make that kind of semantic leap from British baking shows to Australian barbecue shows, that's not an easy thing.
No.
That's not a keyword search. That's not like, oh, I'm searching for baking shows and also will pop up barbecue shows. That doesn't make sense. Like, baking and barbecuing are not the same word, right? So that means that the machine needs to understand the semantic connection, the relational connections between entities in a data set to be able to draw that connection, and to do it at speed and at performance. so that it happens quickly. Like, it's one thing to recommend to me an Australian barbecue show after a British baking show, but if it recommends it to me 5 hours after I watch the thing and I'm already now in sleep, then it's lost the viewer and the eyeballs and it's over. It needs to recommend that to me within seconds. So the
Yeah.
speed of doing that and drawing those kind of relational patterns between entities, that's really the power of vector search. So okay, that's the spiel for vector search. But how do you learn vector search, right? So I would recommend, first of all, finding the next time Chevet is doing his in-person or online immersive workshop,
And that
because
goes the
he's gonna
same for Ben as well.
whatever. But
Either of us.
he's gonna take you through end to end, like everything, from mobile to web to every aspect of it. Um, you cannot find, I think, a better teacher than Chevet when it comes to a lot of these things. Like, honestly, so
I
find
would
wherever
doubt that.
Chevet is.
You're pretty much up there.
Nah, Chevet is so good. Okay, that's enough Chevet love. But in addition to that, if you're on your own and you are looking for a little something to do on your own, I'm a big advocate of self-study as well. You know, like, that's kind of the journey I became a developer with. I went to a boot camp and self-studied, and I just find self-study very important as long as the resources there and the materials are there and I can learn through them. So I created a vector search workshop using Node.js, and it's all run in Codespaces, which is really cool. You've heard of Codespaces before, right?
Of course, of course. I think when Code Spaces was announced for the first time, it was such a big life changer for so many developers who are doing a lot of remote work or are doing work on the go, because you might not be able to carry big machines that can run an entire Kubernetes cluster. And especially if you're like using an iPad, or you're taking a small laptop which cannot run a lot of the different software, you can essentially emulate an entire Ubuntu environment based VS Code instance that can run anything that you want, Docker, Kubernetes, and it comes installed with so many of the different integrations like Python, JavaScript, all these language stacks, which might have some sort of issue installing on your system because of some incompatible dependencies, right? Like how we know something like running it inside of this containerized and not necessarily containerized environment, but like a VM that runs your VS Code instance on top on Ubuntu, which is generally a very safe way to run any software requirements. So I think it it's an amazing way to do development on the fly.
That's exactly right. You captured it perfectly. It kind of like gives you a great development environment for free,
Mhm. Yep.
essentially, offered by GitHub. You don't need to install local dependencies. You don't need to install a local environment. You can run everything in that containerized environment, courtesy of GitHub. So thank you, GitHub, for GitHub Code
Yep.
Spaces. If you pay for, of course, GitHub Premium, you get more CPUs, you get more memory, it runs a little faster. But even if you don't pay, you still get a basic level of GitHub Code Spaces available for X amount of hours per month of compute time. I forgot exactly how many hours, but you get X amount of hours every month, totally free, to do basically whatever you kind of development work you want to do in a free development remote machine provided by GitHub, which is pretty cool. So the idea was, let's offer a workshop online for anyone who wants through Codespaces. So this workshop uses a set of data. It actually offers two paths to you. And in those two paths, you're going to end up doing a lot of stuff. You're going to transform data from the regular data, in this case is JSON, like regular data, into vector embeddings. You're going to learn how to create a vector search index to index that data, and you're going to learn how to search that data using that vector search index. Those are the three skills that you're going to gain by going through this workshop, which is entirely available, open source. You can add, if you see something missing in it, whether in the README or whatever, you can add a PR and help fix it as well, right? Like, it's a totally open source repository. And you can do this all through Couchbase. And the reason and way you can do this through Couchbase is Couchbase Capella, our database managed database service, as we mentioned a few times, now offers a free forever, totally free forever tier, pricing tier. So you can sign up for Couchbase Capella, create an account, create your first database cluster, your first database bucket, add data to it, search that data, create a vector search index, all those things, never ever having to put in a credit card. It's just entirely free. So, and forever, right? So that's a pretty cool thing. So it becomes possible to have these kind of open source workshops for all of us out there in the world who just want to learn things using Couchbase because it's free now. You don't need to be a corporate person or have a
Yeah.
corporate credit card or have the funds. You can just learn and build cool stuff. So the idea, there's essentially two ways in which to run this. The code itself, and actually now we're going to jump into the Couchbase environment. This is Couchbase. This is GitHub Couchbases. In fact, it looks an awful lot like something else. It looks like
VS Code.
VS Code.
Yeah.
It looks like VS Code, but we are actually, if you see the URL path here, that's not the URL path, the folder path, the file path, /workspaces, right? So all my code is kept in /workspaces in this Couchbase environment, and then I'm in the folder, which is the name of the repo, and then I'm in a subfolder and a subfolder of that. That just happens to be where I am right now in my terminal. And then this, of course, is the README that we were just looking at a second ago. In here is the preview, and it's fully functional VS Code environment. I can install extensions, just like if I was in any other VS Code environment. I can manage the code, create the code. I can run extensions. I can run and debug. I have source control. All the things you have in VS Code, you have in a VS Code environment here, including terminals. And this project that's that teaches you vector search through Couchbase is basically running a Node.js server. And the Node.js server offers you two ways to do this. Because, again, we want to lower the barrier of entry. One way is to generate vector embeddings for any piece of data you want. Any. But that's going to cost you money in this formulation because we're using OpenAI to generate the vector embeddings. Now, Chevet, you can generate vector embeddings without using OpenAI. And maybe that's a PR contribution we should add to this workshop as well. But right now, it's using OpenAI and its vector generation embedding API endpoint to generate vector embeddings. So that's one way. But that means you need to have an OpenAI API key to do that. And you would see here a sample.env file, which you would then copy and paste and make it .env or rename it .env. And you see it's asking you for your OpenAI API key to supply that. There's also an environment variable here called use local embedding. And you see that I've set it to true. In fact, in the environment variable itself, I have no personal credentials here. Don't worry, Chevet, don't have a heart attack. There's no API keys being exposed. The only thing I've said here is use local embedding to true. And if I do that, then I do not need I do not need an OpenAI API key.
And in this case, like what type of local embedding are you using, like to generate the embedding? Are you using like Olama or?
No, because I've made it a little easier than that. So I'm not going to use a local embedding generation service, but I think that's a great improvement to this down the road. What I've actually done is something a lot simpler. All I've actually done is if you look in the folder called data, and then where are we?
So you already have like pre-configured data with
query with embedding.json. So this is the query embedding. I've already generated the embeddings for you. I spent my OpenAI API money, and I've generated the embeddings for you in this data. And you see, for example, individual items. Each individual item is a JSON file with both the data plus the embedding. This is what a vector embedding looks like, by the way, my friends. You know what these numbers represent? Does anyone know? You want to pop into the chat if you know. What these numbers represent is actually what? Do you know, Chevet?
Yes. So these.
What do they represent?
So they are basically representing the real world features of anything. It could be like an RGB value of a color, or it could be
exactly. That's exactly right. So say more. I want to hear more. You're doing a beautiful job.
No. So I was just saying that it can be as simple as just the latitude, longitude of any location. That's a 2-dimensional vector. RGB value of a color is a 3-dimensional vector. So these are representing the real world features of anything. It can be an image, it can be a piece of text, it could be yeah. So I mean, mostly we are dealing with images or text based, but yeah, you can also generate embeddings of different other kinds. But they, because like, imagine that if you were to place a bunch of different similar type of items which have similar features in a coordinate plane. So of course, in a coordinate plane, you need to have it represented as numbers. So when you use this embedding model, it takes all of those features from the data and converts it into the relevant numerical values, and then represents it on the Cartesian plane, where then you can see that if there are 2 points which are near to each other, that means that those data points represent more features which are overlapping or similar in real life as compared to two values which are further apart from each other. So
Yes,
that's how
that's
we
exactly
level.
right. Chevet is brilliant, first of all, everyone. That is 100% right. These numbers down here represent, as you said, the dimensions, right, of the features of this data. So in this example, what is this data? C3PO from Star Wars. This is data about our friendly little assistant C3PO from Star Wars. And we see his height is 167, his mass is 75, no hair color, right? Skin color is gold, eye color is yellow, and his birth year is 112 BBY. And he has no gender. So they have no gender. And this is the link to their homeworld, and these are the films that shows up in, and the species link, and etc. Right? So this is that data represented as the features of that data. And when you do a vector search comparison, now we hinted at the fact that there's this thing called dot product. It's one similarity metric, one measurement algorithm. There's others as well. There's things like Manhattan distance. There's things like cosine. There's all types of similarity metrics. What they're essentially doing with different formulas is comparing the dimensions of a vector embedding A against the dimensions of vector embedding B, and showing you how far or close they are in space, in vector space. And closer, for a lot of the metrics, closer equals more similar, right? Farther apart equals less similar, more dissimilar. So that's, and there's different ways to do that, whether you're looking at the angle of distance, which would be the cosine, if I'm not mistaken, or you're something a little more simplistic, at least mathematically, like dot product is more simplistic mathematically, where it's just really calculating the raw difference in number, I believe, if I'm not
Yeah.
mistaken, and other formulations as well. That's essentially what's happening, right? Which sounds pretty straightforward, except to get these numbers, it takes a lot of machine learning to capture, again, like we mentioned, the relational entities and the semantic relationships, conceptual relationships, etc. Things like dealing with polysemy, which is the multiple meanings of words and ambiguity and all other
Yeah.
sorts of things you have to deal with when you're dealing with human language and grammar and all the fun stuff that we humans complicate things overly so we have to
Yeah.
decomplicate them for our machines. So okay, so we have these embeddings, and if you don't want to spend your own money, you can run this workshop using the embeddings already created for you in these JSON files. So you can either use this Star Wars data that's been provided for you, or you can provide any data you want as long as you have an OpenAI API key. And if we go back to the server code, so we see if we're not using a local embedding, when we need to have the OpenAI API key defined, because we're going to need it, right? Otherwise, and then we continue, right? And then we create a Couchbase connection using the Couchbase Node.js SDK. This is a very standard way, kind of, if you read the Couchbase Node SDK docs, you're going to find essentially this formula presented in the docs, creating an async function called init, which it creates a connection to our database called our cluster. And then we can invoke that function inside of our functions. We're going to invoke that function inside of our functions interacting with Couchbase data in order to make a connection to our Couchbase cluster, right? And then we have a function to get our stored embeddings, right? So this function does the vector search for us. This is the vector search function, and it's really cool. Let's actually take a minute to look at this code, just a minute, because I think it's really, really cool. Okay, so we see that init function, right? Now we have our cluster. We establish connection to our cluster, and then we want to grab our scope in our, just like every database, most databases have a database, a scope, right? And default bucket, default data levels, etc. So we want to grab our scope. By default, it's called default, right? So we're grabbing the default scope. And then we are grabbing our search index we created called vector search index. That's what we called it in our workshop. If you renamed it, you should probably rename it here as well. If you follow the workshop, you called it vector search index. And then we're going to create a search request using the Couchbase Node.js SDK. And we do that by, this is our Node SDK. We've called it Couchbase. We go back up here on line 2. We see we are declaring Couchbase as the invocation of the SDK requiring Couchbase. So we go back down here. And now we are calling vector search. Sorry, did I go? No, we're here. Yeah, okay. Now we call search request on Couchbase. And we're going to create a new instance of a search request, right? And we're going to pass into that a vector search query to our search request. And the vector query we're going to pass in is one we're going to create on that in the moment right now on line 51. And the vector query we're going to create is we're going to use the embeddings from our data in our database, which is always under the embedding field. We're going to use the query embedding that we pass into the function, which is the embedding of the search term that I've created for you if you're using the free example. And we're going to return back the 5 top candidates. You can change this to 6 to 7 to 8 to 9 to 10, whatever you want. We're going to turn back the 5 top most similar candidates to that query. And then we run that search. We map through the results of that search and return back the ID of the row that of the top 5 and the score of how similar it was. That's what we return back. That's essentially the entire code. The rest of it is we fetch the documents now. So now we have the IDs of the documents. Now we want to go back and fetch the data itself from those rows in our database on Star Wars data. And we return back that content, right, along with the score. And then that's essentially it. So if you look back at the README, you see, it's very large, that image there. You see, so when we're using the importing data with pre-generated embeddings, we would first edit the config file config. That's over here. So if I go back up, this file here is what we're going to use. This defines our configuration information for a really cool tool called Couchbase Shell, which I know you talked about last week on stream. Couchbase Shell is our CLI tool to interact with Couchbase data. So you don't go in depth on this, but essentially your Couchbase Shell config will basically tell the CLI how to connect to Couchbase. So you provide it to your connection string, your username, and your password, essentially, right?
Yeah.
So we're going to do that. And let's go back down. Almost there. Okay, and then once we've done that, we will load up Couchbase Shell. We will then turn these embeddings and put them in, we'll take our embeddings and I'll upsert them into our database. And we can even just do a quick query to check that it's there. That's essentially it. To create the index, you can create the index also from Couchbase Shell. To create the index is with create index, the name of your bucket, the similarity metric you want to use. In this case, we're using dot product, the name of our index. We call it vector search index. Which field is indexing from? It's from the embedding field. And how many dimensions are in each embedding? And that's 1,536 dimensions, which is pretty standard number for most embedding models on OpenAI, for example. And that's it. So if we do this, if you notice, for example, we have the node server already running in one terminal window. And now we're going to open up our Couchbase Shell. So now we're in Couchbase Shell. We see that it says my name and we're in Capella. Let's just give it a bucket that we want to put the data into. I created a bucket already called live stream bucket, right? Live stream bucket is just a bucket. I've named it for this live stream. So now we know we're going to be using the live stream bucket. And now you've seen also that suddenly the terminal input has changed in the shell from just Capella to now telling me I'm in live stream bucket. So now any data interactions I'm doing by default will be done in the live stream bucket. And then I'm going to run that command. So we're listing all the files that are in here, right? Individual items with embedding, all the JSON files. We're opening each of them up. We're wrapping the content and we're inserting them into our bucket. We run the command and we see we process 30 pieces of data and successfully inserted or upserted into our database, into our bucket,
Okay.
30 pieces of data. Pretty cool.
Yeah.
Which means if we go back to Capella UI and we take a look at this, we might see the data, Shive. Do you think we're going to see the data?
I think so. We should.
We should,
Mm.
hopefully.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So we're going to go to documents. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. And we're in live stream bucket. And look at that. Here's the first 10 of
Perfect.
them.
Yep.
And we click and look at one document. And there it is. It
There it
works.
is.
Friends, it works.
High five.
So the whole point of this was to show everyone that you have a resource on GitHub. You don't need to install anything on your computer. No dependencies. You may or may not have a Node.js environment set up already locally. That doesn't matter. You could just open up with one click on this. One click and create a new GitHub code space with your credentials, with your GitHub account, basically, and run this workshop step by step.
Exactly.
So that's one thing I wanted to show. I think it's pretty cool. If anyone has any questions on this or is curious about this, please share them now or get in touch with us later. We would love to talk to you about that. But in the spirit of how Hacktoberfest and open source can not only be good for altruism, can not only be good for your professional development, it's also a great way to learn things by diving into open source repositories specifically made to teach you things. Pretty cool. The second thing I wanted to show you all today is something, another example. And this one is from an entirely different world. So now we're going to put on a different hat. You ready for a different hat, Shive? We're
Yes,
put on a different
absolutely.
hat now. We're going to put on our DevOps hat. We're putting on a DevOps hat.
Yeah.
DevOps. We love DevOps. I may be going to a DevOps Days event starting tomorrow, so I'm in a very DevOps kind of mood. You know?
So you're pretty much, you're pretty much like doing a dry run of your Terraform talk that I know that you're giving a presentation on that, right?
Maybe that may be the case. Who knows? It may be the example.
Yeah.
But this whole conversation about this has to start back in 2014. And it has to start with this blog post. This blog post is no longer available on the actual web. It's only available on the Wayback Machine, the Internet Archive, from 2013, June 23rd, 2013, written by one of probably the legends of software development and open source and everything around there, Chad Fowler, right? So Chad Fowler in 2013 started talking about something called immutable infrastructure. And immutable infrastructure became the genesis of what would eventually morph into the practice that we call today infrastructure as code, IAC. Yeah. This conversation, 11 years later, is now wrapped up in things like Terraform and Pulumi. But without this blog post, we may not have had a HashiCorp writing Terraform and a Pulumi. That's wild. Like, that's absolutely wild. And this blog post is not that long. It's pretty short. But this blog post was pivotal. Basically, what's the idea of this blog post? Chad says, look, every old system starts getting warts and bumps, starts getting bruises, starts getting Band-Aids. There is no old system in the world that you don't find patches on, kind of workarounds to fix something. Some developer, some engineer, some system admin, whatever, at some point applied some kind of workaround because something was broken, some dependency was no longer working, and they had to do this fix to get it to work. And those things layer and layer and layer. And before you know it, you have this monstrosity of a system. And Chad says, back in 2013, we're starting something in my job called immutable deployments. And what does the word immutable first mean?
Immutable means something that cannot be changed.
Right. So what does it mean to have immutable deployments or immutable infrastructure? Once you deploy,
that means that you can change it on the go, on the fly.
It means you cannot change it on the fly.
Oh, sorry. I thought you mentioned mutable deployments.
No, immutable.
Immutable. Okay.
Immutable.
I heard him.
It,
Okay. I heard
it
immutable.
means once you've deployed
Yeah.
this piece of
That means.
infrastructure,
Hmm.
you cannot change it.
Yeah.
Well, what does that eventually lead us to? What is that like? It's like version control software. When you put out a new release of something, or you
Hmm.
issue a Semver patch release, you want to roll back that patch release. What do? Do you just ignore you release that patch release? Do you pretend it never existed? No. You put out another patch release to roll back the
Yeah.
patch release if you
Yeah.
made a mistake. Same thing if it's a minor release or a major release.
Yeah.
Yes, technically in Git, you can erase commits as if they
Hmm.
never existed. And I've had to do that when I've accidentally
Multiple times.
committed. Right. You commit credential information, you do something
Yeah.
you shouldn't do.
Hmm.
But is that the best practice normally?
I would probably say no, because you still want to maintain a version history of every single commit to probably learn from your past mistakes, so that other people might not. And I think it's just for more. Um, if you were deleting commits, then of course someone else work might get removed. So you want to maintain that. But when you're doing like a rollback, you can just take the previous state of the entire system without having to remove the commits. So I think like that's
That's
probably a safer
exactly right.
option. Yeah.
That's exactly right. That's 100% right. So, unless you're dealing with the extreme examples of you need to erase your history of
Environment
committing
variables.
sensitive information, it's
Yeah.
better to maintain the version history, which is exactly basically what he says here, right?
Exactly.
So
Hmm.
what he said, if you absolutely know a system has been created via automation and never changed since the moment of creation, most of the problems I described above disappear. Need to
Yeah.
upgrade? No problem. Build a new upgraded system and throw away the old one. New app revision? Same thing. Build a server or image with a new revision and throw away the old ones. And it's giving us the confidence we need to rapidly iterate on our backend infrastructure as we continue to make things faster, more scalable, and dependable for our customers, and flexible to move our applications forward more freely. Thinking of infrastructure this way changes how I view our systems pretty fundamentally. It's it is a paradigm shift, right? It's
Yeah.
applying what we take for granted nowadays, what we take for granted in software, to our infrastructure as well. And that's where something like Pulumi comes in mind. Sorry, with Terraform and Pulumi, essentially kind of similar ideas, where Terraform comes into mind. Terraform basically lets you treat infrastructure as code as a concept, lets you treat your infrastructure like you would treat your software, that you
Yeah.
consistently roll out new versions, you have a version control over your infrastructure, and it's done programmatically. And if you speak to most folks working in the space of DevOps and the practice of DevOps nowadays, you would be hard pressed to find people that say, no, we shouldn't have any level of infrastructure as code. You'd be hard pressed to find something that says, no, we shouldn't be doing this at all. And there's people with qualms and issues about the level, the type, the ways we're doing it, finessing it. But the idea that we manage our infrastructure in a systematized, version controlled way is a net positive for most people, probably.
Yeah.
Just putting that out there. Maybe I'll learn tomorrow that people disagree with me when I'm at the DevOps event. But I think most people agree with that, which is
Hmm.
why for Couchbase as well, we have a Terraform provider for Capella for our
Terraform. Yeah.
managed database as a
And
service.
it's super powerful. I mean, just
Super
goes
powerful.
super powerful, without a doubt.
Because what is
Because
it? So in the language of Terraform, what is a provider?
I think
What is it?
I guess I might not be the most comfortable when it comes to providing this answer, but I feel, because like Terraform is an open platform where
Yes.
you can denote, you can basically set up an EC2 cluster, but then on top of a dedicated VM, so if you just think of a normal way of deploying something, you'll probably have a Kubernetes cluster, and then on top of that Kubernetes cluster you will manually add some Helm charts, or perhaps you will most likely you're going to be using Helm charts. But if you're not looking to go with the route of Helm charts and manually doing everything, you can use Terraform, and with the Terraform adapter for a certain piece of technology, you're essentially similar to how like a Helm chart works. You are installing those particular components, and in this case, since we have a Couchbase provider, we are going to be like having that same base infrastructure layer, but on top of the or on top of them the actual software components that we have for Couchbase Capella, that is what the Terraform provider is essentially like helping us automatically set it up.
You know, Chavez, you start off by saying I'm not such an expert on this, but then you say it so beautifully and so well. So I just want to throw
No,
that
I was
out
just
there.
thinking on the fly.
You're thinking on the fly, and yet you're so good at it. So let's just throw that out there. That's exactly right. And so you're able to manage and provision resources. And in the world of DevOps, resources means like basically all your servers,
Yeah,
all your providers, like your database providers, your auth providers, your authentication providers, all that stuff. You can manage it, provision it, set authorizations on it, set the right access controls on it, all of that through the way you would basically treat a piece of code that you were version controlling.
yeah,
So here is a great example using the Couchbase Terraform provider, where basically in this amazing article blog post, and this blog post is a good example when you write good content, it stays good, no matter how many months since you wrote it. So this blog post was written in December of 2023, which is almost a year now. We're getting close to a year, by our colleague Priya. And it's a fantastic blog post because it's everything in it is essentially timeless unless Terraform dramatically changes in some point. It's essentially a timeless blog post. So unless Terraform dramatically changes in 2025, in 2026, Priya's blog post will still be applicable and still be
yeah.
useful and still be helpful, which is really just a testament to her excellent way of writing these blog posts. So you
Mhm.
look back in this blog post and you see that she has given us this whole file, which basically creates a new cluster creates a project within an organization, within our Capella organization, creates a cluster within that project, which is the equivalent of a database in Couchbase, and creates a bucket, which is the equivalent of a table in that database within the cluster, all programmatically. And we can take a look and see here that we require providers Couchbase Capella, which is a registered open source provider on the Terraform registry. We see providing our authentication token. We see we create the example project resource here with a name and description. We then create our cluster here with a name and description. We tell it all kinds of things about what kind of cluster we want it to be, how much compute space, how much disk space, number of nodes, the type of services we want it to have access to, data indexing and querying. All of these things are optional parameters. A lot of them are optional that you can add to really get granular control
Yeah.
over what you're creating. And then at the end of it, we also create a bucket inside that cluster. So we pass in the project ID and the cluster ID, and we essentially create a new bucket with a new bucket name. Again, with some levels of granularity, depending on how much granularity we want to add into our configuration for this. And what I've done is I've taken Priya's excellent blog post and I provided a very simple, even more simple, kind of toned down example of that, which
Mhm.
basically allows you to create a new bucket. So you have to go do the work of creating a Capella organization in the Capella Web UI, grabbing your project and cluster IDs. Once you have those things, you can then run through six examples, not even seven, six example steps, all of them kind of one liners to
Yeah.
see this in action. Now, this is not going to be a real life scenario that your infrastructure is code is going to be as simple as six little one liner steps, but it gives you a nice taste for what it looks like. And if you take a look, and I also provide you a walkthrough video, which shows you exactly what this looks like.
Mhm.
Will this run? That is a good question. Should run.
Yeah.
Hmm. Nothing ever works, even a video. Why isn't the video working?
The video is the
Oh, there
safe
we go.
spot.
Exactly. So we see we're signing into Capella to create those resources for us. You should always use a password manager, my friends. That's why I kept that in there to remind you to always use a password manager like
Always.
OnePass
Yeah.
or something else. We see all my examples of all of my different clusters I have available. You can see that I need an organization management API key. That's where you go in the Capella UI to get your API key. And so you see, for example, once this Terraform demo Ben, that's the API key I'm using for this demo. And then you again see my clusters, and we're clicking through to a cluster, and you get an example of all the buckets on the left-hand side, all the different tables or buckets that will be available in this. And when we're done with this step, the next step, we're going to have a new bucket created for us through Terraform and infrastructure as code, using the Couchbase Capella Terraform provider, which is available in the HashiCorp Terraform registry, which is actively maintained, was last updated just 11 days ago, as an example. Yeah. And you can, and it's, again, open source as well, in the spirit of Hacktoberfest, entirely open source. And you can look at the code, you can read about the code, and you can even click right through to the API spec documentation for Capella. And all Terraform provider does is wrap around these management APIs and provide you with the ability to do all of what you could do with the management Capella APIs through infrastructure as code, including deleting clusters, migrating clusters, turning off buckets, and creating a bucket, which is exactly what we are going to do. So in order to do that, we need to look, and we need to create the Terraform file, which is the instruction set for Terraform. This is basically what that looks like. We provide the right required provider. We provide the right name of the organization ID and the project ID. It's all provided in the files we set up in variables.terraform and terraform.tfrs, etc. And then we take a look at the plan. So when you run Terraform plan with the name of the thing, you actually see what you're going to be creating. In this case, I already have a new bucket, so it's going to be creating a new bucket 2. Right? Because new bucket already exists. So it's creating a new bucket 2. That's kind of how smart Terraform is, by the way. Gives you like that kind of like intuitive feedback as well. I say, yes, I want to execute this plan, and it's done. It's now created a new bucket 2. That's it. If I refresh my buckets in the Capella UI, I will now see, when it refreshes, new bucket 2. I've created a Couchbase Capella bucket with Terraform in probably, what was that, 2 minutes, give or take, 3 minutes, not much longer.
Same time,
pretty,
yeah.
Pretty, 3 minutes and 5.
Imagine that if we had to do this manually, of course, so many steps involved, but I really love the art of being able to do everything programmatically. So I'm not sure if you have heard of Raw Code Academy.
I have, but
David,
for our community, tell us about it a little bit.
Yeah. So David Flanagan, who is the founder behind Raw Code Academy, he's one of the best engineering brains that I have probably seen in my life, and he loves to do everything through the art of programming. So he has Raw Code Academy, which is an entire so it has a YouTube as well, but it mainly is courses around DevOps, around Rust, a lot of like high-end programming language, right? And then, so the idea is that as soon as he's done like building one video, as soon as he has like done editing a video, he basically has entire pipelines that run programmatically, which allows him to publish his video over to YouTube, Twitch, LinkedIn, Twitter, wherever he wants to post, and he does that all through the click of just a single button. So taking care of the thumbnail that will go, the title, all of that is defined as YAML files, which automatically get pushed via the APIs for all these different platforms. So of course, I know like there are platforms that allow you to post to multiple sites, but he's doing all of this through his local setup that he's running, like a Kubernetes cluster that he's running locally. So I mean, at some point, like for some folks, it might be over engineering, but like when you go that down, that deep into building really cool stuff, he's like one person. So I think like when someone is starting off with Terraform, it's a very similar way. Like one of the examples where I used Terraform myself was to basically build, like have a Kubernetes cluster and run VLLM and like machine learning workloads. Now, if you were to set it up on your own, it can take a lot of time. But once you have like, of course, initially defining your entire Terraform, and of course, if you have multiple components, it might be complex. But if your company is repeatedly using it, then the type of benefit that you get over the duration of the next 1 2 years, right? Because you now don't have to manually run shell scripts to set up servers, manually set up their the what like all the different things that you have to do just to set up a server, like the reverse proxy and the certificates. All of that can technically be then taken care by writing that one Terraform script and rerunning it whenever you want to deploy a new server. So I think in terms of productivity for DevOps engineers, it's a massive, massive godsend kind of gift.
And it's one of those areas which, even if we don't work in the DevOps
Yeah.
space, like if we're just not just, but if we're software developers exclusively, it
Hmm.
doesn't hurt to gain some
Yeah.
knowledge and insight into things like infrastructure and resource deployments and provisioning
Hmm.
resources, and
Yeah.
getting some familiarity with the concepts and tooling of the space. Because
Hmm.
more and more we're finding that developers have to do some of this,
Yeah.
and sysadmins or DevOps engineers or SREs also have to do some software. And it's
Hmm.
kind of like going back and forth, and we're finding some kind of confluence of skill sets, and it only will help you further down the road if you have some familiarity. So we hope that providing some that blog post by Priya and this workshop that you can run on GitHub from myself and all the other resources out there, that you essentially can level up a little bit and in your own
Absolutely.
pace, at your own time. And again, using and benefiting from the fact that Couchbase has an entirely free tier to do all this with Couchbase without costing you any money. Using GitHub
Yeah.
Codespaces, which is a free resource, using Capella, which has a free tier. Learn, skill up, and get better at what you do and gain new skills without spending anything except for
Hmm.
your time, but you're going to get back at that time exponentially. So
Yeah.
that's essentially the idea. Because open source is not only about docs and about code contributions and about contributing to open source, but it's also about taking benefit and learning from the great amount of resources out there that are in the open source that are specifically there to gear to help you learn and
Yeah.
grow. And those, what we just talked about today, are just a couple of them. There's so many more, but it's just a couple of them within the Couchbase universe that can help you get
Absolutely.
there.
Yeah.
Chevet, we're at the hour. We're actually past the
Yeah.
hour.
Yeah.
This has been a really
Yes.
good conversation.
No, I think like it was all you today, showing two completely distinct kind of uh, things. One end-to-end workshop on vector search, and then diving right into the core of DevOps. I think that it takes special people to be able to make that switch. Because like some people might just require like half an hour just to make that switch between all the way writing some Terraform script and doing core ML with. I think like that's kudos to you to make that switch and still uh, showcase and share your knowledge with us in such a beautiful way, and doing that so gracefully. So I think like that's a lot of uh,
I think
born talent.
the function of developer relations is to be a really
Yeah,
good generalist
yeah,
and to be
definitely.
really, really good at popping through all these things. I don't think I could make a good DevOps engineer in real
Hmm.
life, and I make a pretty mediocre software developer
Yeah,
in real life, but I'm a really, really good generalist. Just like, and I think you are not just a generalist, you're also an expert in some of these areas as well, which is really helpful. But I like to multitask and move
yeah,
across all of the different areas as much as possible. Friends,
absolutely.
this concludes our last stream on celebrating Hacktoberfest. Stay tuned for updates on what will be happening next week. I promise you really exciting stuff. Chevet
Yes,
promises you really exciting stuff. Stay tuned. We want to keep the suspense going for what we'll be
suspense. Yeah,
diving into in our next series of streams starting in the beginning of November next week.
yeah,
So until then, we wish you adieu. We wish you farewell. Sayonara. And we'll see you the next time. Be well, everyone.
absolutely. Thank you so much.